Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, in the last lecture we tried to understand the different concept of geomorphology. There were about 10 concepts, major concepts which we discussed in detail. And today we are moving further and will try to understand geomorphic cycle, why it is necessary, how it was started, and who are the major theorists. One of the major theorists is W.M. Davis. We will try to understand his concept in detail. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio Dr. Abhay Kumar. He is working in one of the think tank, Delhi-based think tank, working in the area of regional development. The name is Institute for Human Development, and he has written a number of papers, research reports, and the books on the different issues of urbanization, poverty, and livelihood. And he has a special interest in this area, geomorphology. So I think his knowledge and experience will help us to understand this topic and give a kind of guidance how to study the geomorphic cycle. So on your behalf, I welcome him for the EduSet lecture on this very topic. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Amrendraji. Good afternoon, friends. Yesterday we discussed about the fundamental concepts of geomorphology given by William Thornbury. Moving ahead, today we are going to discuss concepts of geomorphic cycle. And now, to begin with, let me tell you that there have been number of debates which is going on in the geomorphology discipline, and there are number of debates, and one of such debate is whether the landscape formation is cyclic or non-cyclic. Till yet, there is no definite theory which is accepted by all. There, each landscapes have different lithology, structure, and different processes acting on that, and therefore there is still no theory which is widely acceptable, and therefore it is still in the formulation stage. Today our theories postulated so far largely lacks elasticity, and it is unable to accommodate all aspects and all factors into it. There are diversity, variability, complexity in landform characteristics, and all these diversities, variability, and complexity in landforms are not captured in one geomorphic cycle, and therefore what we need is a composite or multiple theories rather than a simple theory. Now, to begin with, why do we need geomorphic theories? Famous geomorphologist C.G. Higgins, he said that we need geomorphic theories in order to integrate three major aspects into it. One is description, the other is classification, the third is genesis. Ideal theory, according to C.G. Higgins, is the one which is simple, contemporary, as well as it is able to present basis for historical interpretation and future prediction. So, we need this geomorphic theory. The need of the geomorphic theory has been felt because of integrating the three major aspects of description, classification, and genesis of landforms into one. Now, as we have discussed in the fundamental concepts of geomorphology, the first theory in geomorphology was that given by Hutton's. His famous theory of uniformitarianism is considered to be the first major theory in the discipline of geomorphology. After Hutton, another attempt was made by a famous US geomorphologist known as GK Gilbert. GK Gilbert tried to give a set of principles on the different landscape formation. GK Gilbert has tried to generalize the genesis and development of landforms in the different parts of United States, and during those generalization process he has come up with a number of laws. Those laws are law of uniform slope, law of structure, law of divides, law of increasing acclivity, law of tendency of equality of action, law of interdependence of past, etc. Now, after Hutton's attempt and GK Gilbert's attempt of theorizing the geomorphic, the landscape development, the first real theory was given by William Morris Davis. William Morris Davis was a US geographer who is renowned for giving the first real theory of landscape development through his famous concept of geomorphic cycle. William Morris Davis has given his concept largely in the, he has initially given his concept for the humid region. Later on he expanded his concept of geomorphic cycle and the landscape development in the area of arid, glacial, coastal, etc. The geographical cycle given by William Morris Davis became very popular and applied to nearly all kind of landscapes. For instance, there were several other scholars who tried to emulate the theory given by William Morris Davis, and Bidet and Wizik produced his karst cycle of erosion. L.C. Peltier has given his periglacial cycle of erosion. So, on almost all kind of landforms, the geographic cycle model was applied and studied. But later on it was severely criticized, and many of the scholars have outrightly rejected the geographical cycle propounded by William Morris Davis. For instance, Walther Penck postulated his own model of geomorphic system, and he largely rejected the Davisian model because he was not believing that the geomorphic cycle, the landscape development, is a time dependent process. Rather, he gave his own geomorphic system theory, in which he has given his time independent development of landforms. There were several new models which were developed later on, and those were again based on the Davisian cyclic concepts and modifications in it. For instance, C.H. Crickmay has given panplanation cycle, concept of unequal acclivity. L.C. King in 1948, he gave the concept of periplanation cycle, hill slope cycle, river cycle and landscape cycle. J.C. Pugh in 1962 gave his savanna cycle. S.S. Kuhn in 1975 gave his episodic erosion model. Similarly, Crumbin and Ari Horton in 1932 and 1945 introduced these quantitative techniques in landform development. So, these were all the cycles that were based on the Davisian model of geographic cycle and applied to different landforms, but later on it was forcefully rejected on several counts, and after the rejection there were few more theories that appeared, and among those theories there are dynamic equilibrium theory given by A.N. Stroller, J.T. Hack and R.G. Shorley. There is geomorphic threshold theory, tectonal landform theory given by M. Morisawa, episodic erosion theory given by S.S. Kuhn in 1975. So, these are the theories that came up in the rejection of Davisian concept of geographic cycle. So, this is how different concept of geomorphic cycle has evolved over time, but the main proponent or the main initiator of the geographic cycle, geomorphic cycle, is still considered to be the William Morris Davis, because it is his concept of geographic cycle which was later applied in different landforms and again criticized, and again the new theories that came up were also based on the criticism of the William Morris Davis. They were not very fresh theory. So now we are going to understand the geomorphic theory, the concept of geomorphic theory given by several scholars, starting with GK Gilbert. After GK Gilbert, I will try to explain the William Morris Davis concept of geographic cycle, geomorphic cycle. Later on in the next lecture, I will try to explain the concept of geographic cycle given by Walther Penck, L.C. King, etc. Now, before William Morris Davis, there was one attempt made by GK Gilbert, wherein he tried to give some of his inferences from the field into a set of principles. He said that landscape remain in equilibrium condition, their history is rhythmic, punctuated by oscillatory changes, and their forms are punctuated by frictional rhythms arising out of the mechanism of driving and resisting forces. So there are three important factors into his concept. One is equilibrium condition. So when a landscape is being formed, it ultimately leads to an equilibrium condition. Secondly, the history of landscape formation is rhythmic and oscillating. It is not very smooth, And thirdly, the landscape is the result of, or it is outcome of driving and resisting forces. By driving and resisting forces, he meant that driving force is the endogenetic force and resisting force is the exogenetic force. So there are three important things in the theory of in the geomorphic theory of GK Gilbert, which is equilibrium, rhythmic history, as well as the mechanism of driving and resisting forces. GK Gilbert didn't prefer to call himself a theorist. Rather, he wished that he should be called as an investigator, largely because he said a theorist is always busy in proving his theory, whereas an investigator is always looking for newer facts and adding to what has already been discovered. So therefore, he himself were preferring to be called as investigator. During his landscape theory, he gave a number of laws, set of principles. Those laws I discussed earlier. It was a law of uniform slope, law of structure, law of divide, law of tendency to equality, dynamic equilibrium, law of independence of parts, etc. So this was the concept given by GK Gilbert. Now after GK Gilbert, the first ever and almost most renowned geomorphic concept was given by William Morris Davis. William Morris Davis was from United States, and he wrote an essay on geographic cycle in 1899. But before that, he wrote a complete cycle of a river life in 1889. Later on, he also wrote on slope evolution. So most of his writings was during the late 18th century, during 1880, 1889, 1899, and some of them were immediately after in the beginning of the 19th century. The initial attempt of geomorphic cycle given by William Morris Davis was largely on the runoff water as its major geomorphic agencies. Now, according to William Morris Davis, a geographic or geomorphic cycle is nothing but a sequential development of landforms through time. He said that geomorphic cycle is a span of time. It is a period of time under which a landform undergoes its transformation by the process of land sculpture ending into featureless peneplain. So geomorphic cycle, according to William Morris Davis, is nothing but a period of time. He was referring to the time frame under which a landform development undergoes its transformation from the mountains to peneplain, and that time span he said that it is considered to be a geomorphic cycle. In the concept given by William Morris Davis, there were three important factors which leads to the landform development, and these three factors are structure, process and time. By time he meant stage also. So, this structure, process and time is known famously as the trio of Davis, because he has based his entire principle of geomorphic cycle on the three factors, that is structure, process and time, which I had discussed in the fundamental concepts of geomorphology in greater detail. Now, Davisian model was based on some certain premises. What are those premises? First premises of Davisian model was that landform develops or evolves from endogenetic and exogenetic forces. As we have seen earlier, that geomorphic processes operate on the landscape, and these geomorphic processes are endogenetic and exogenetic forces. So, Davisian model was, the first premises of Davisian model was that it evolves from endogenetic and exogenetic forces. Secondly, Davis said that evolution of landforms takes place in a very orderly manner. One is systematic and another is sequential. So, a landform development or the evolution of landform is very much systematic, very much orderly and very much sequential. He said that streams erode their valleys downward until the graded condition is achieved. So, a river, a stream, when it starts eroding on the surface, then it keeps on eroding until the graded conditions of that particular stream is achieved. The question is, what do you mean by graded condition? A graded stream is one in which over a period of years slope is delicately adjusted to provide with available discharge and with prevailing channel characteristics just the velocity required for transportation of the load supplied from the drainage basin. So, a graded stream is one which has the sufficient gradient to transport the depositional materials in it supplied from the nearby places. So, if a stream is able to completely transfer or transport the materials in it, the gradient which is needed for it is the gradient and its ability to transport the material both together constitute or forms the graded stream. This particular stage is also called as a profile of equilibrium, because a river stream is having as much of gradient as it requires to transport the materials or sediments. So, that is why it is also called as a profile of equilibrium. Another premise of Davisian model was that there is a very short period of rapid rate of uplift in the landmass. So, according to Davis, the upliftment of landmass is very short and rapid. It is not time taking procedure. It abruptly uplifts, and after the upliftment is over, then only the erosion starts. So, these were the basic premises of Davis. His last two premises, as you can see, one is that upliftment in landmass is a very short and rapid, and erosion starts only when the upliftment is complete. So, while the upliftment is going on, the erosion is not taking place. After the upliftment is complete, the erosion process starts and the geomorphic cycle begins. Now, let us understand the concept of geomorphic cycle given by Davis. As I said that the cycle begins with the upliftment of landmass. It does not begin during the upliftment of landmass, but it only begins after the upliftment of landmass. Secondly, as I said, there is a rapid rate of short period of upliftment of landmass of homogeneous structure. Again, Davis said that no river can erode its valley beyond base level. Now, by base level he meant that sea level. So, a river can erode its valley only up to the base level, because it cannot erode below the sea level. After the upliftment of landmass stops the phase of cycle of erosion, then only the cycle of erosion starts. After the upliftment of landmass stops, then only the cycle of erosion starts. And this cycle of erosion, when it starts, it passes through three different phases. One is youth phase, the second is mature phase, the third is old phase. Now, this is a very famous, or you can say organic classification of Davis in the case of geomorphic cycle, because it relates or it simulates the cycle of erosion with that of a lifetime of a human being. So, as human being passes through his young age, mature age and old age, similarly Davis said that a cycle of erosion or the geomorphic cycle also passes through the young age, mature age and old age. Now, each of the stages, youth, mature and old age, have certain characteristics. It is characterized by certain features which we must know. What happens in the youth stage? Let me tell you that Davisian concept of geomorphic cycle was largely based on the fluvial process. So, the agent of erosion was streams, water, but the same erosion cycle, the same geomorphic cycle has been applied to different erosive agents such as glacier, karst, coastal, all these agents have also been studied separately. But right now what we are discussing is about the fluvial cycle, the fluvial geomorphic cycle. Now, he said that in the youth stage, small rivers and short tributaries are engaged in headward erosion, due to which they extend their length and it leads to stream lengthening. So, stream lengthening is a process which is largely found in youth stage, when the small rivers and their short tributaries continuously engage itself in the headward erosion. So, in the youth stage there is a headward erosion, and because of which stream lengthening takes place. In the youth stage there is a very steep slope and steep channel gradient which leads to pothole drilling. In the mountains where there is very high level of gradients, steep slope, there pothole drilling takes place, and it also leads to the increase in the depth of the valley. Valleys become depth and narrow and have steep sided slopes of convex plans. We know that during this youth stage only we find the landscape of gorges and canyons. The steep channel gradient increases the velocity and kinetic energy of the river flow, and this gradient increases leads to the increased transporting capacity of the rivers also. So, when there is a higher kinetic energy in the river flow, it leads to the higher or increased transporting capacity, and it leads to the it can transport big boulders also into its channel, which is not possible later on. So, in the youth stage only it is possible that the transporting capacity of a river is very high because of the higher kinetic energy stored in it. Davis has tried to illustrate the entire geomorphic cycle through a graphical representation, wherein he has tried to say that upper curve is, as you can see in this picture, the beginning is the uplifted landmass, after which the erosional process, the cycle of erosion or this geomorphic cycle begins, and you can see there is youth stage, maturity stage and old stage. In the youth stage you can see there is overall higher relief, and in the maturity stage you can see the relief is declining, and when it approaches the old stage, the mature and the relief features becomes almost featureless. So it becomes completely plain, which is characterized by Monadnock's and Penny plane. So you can see here that the upper curve is not affected by the erosion and the lower curve falls rapidly in the youth stage. Thus the relative relief continues to increase till the end of youthful stage, when ultimate maximum relief is attained. Valleys are of during this particular youth stage, when the valleys are created by the steeped gradient, it forms the V shape, and there only we find the gorge and canyon kind of landforms. The inter-stream tracts, that is the area between the two streams, is maybe very extensive and poorly drained. This particular stage of youth is also characterized by rapids and waterfalls. River capture is another feature of this stage. Now what happens in the river capture? Once there is a higher gradient, higher velocity of the river, the smaller channels that flows downstreams, it comes under the under the river system, and it almost gets lost in the main channel, and that is what we call as river capture. Now coming to the mature stage, what are the characteristics of the mature stage? After youth stage, when the river is very forceful, where the gradient is very sharp, the forcefulness of the river, the gradient of the river starts declining, and this particular stage is marked with lateral erosion rather than vertical erosion, and it creates a well integrated drainage network. Then in the earlier in the youth stage we have seen that river capture is taking place, whereas in this particular stage we can see that there is a very beautiful well integrated drainage network is being formed in the during the mature stage. The graded conditions of the river, the graded conditions as I discussed earlier, that it is the capacity of the river to transport load and the gradient required for that, that the equilibrium conditions of that particular two process is called as graded conditions, are spread over large areas in the mature stage, and most of the tributaries are graded also to the base level of erosion. So not only the main channels but also the tributaries in the mature stage attain the graded condition. Now vertical erosion and valley deepening, as I said, that it reduced during the mature stage. The summit of water divides is also eroded, and there is marked fall in upper curve. The relief starts declining and the upper curve of the hills starts declining as well. There is absolute and relative relief both decreases during the mature phase. Now instead of V-shaped curve that we were getting in the youth stage, here what we found is U-shape, where the base is not being degraded a lot, but the lateral erosion is taking place a lot, and therefore what we found is U-shaped structure or U-shaped valley. There is also substantial decrease in channel gradient in the later stage of mature stage, and flow velocity and transporting capacity also decreases. Now there are certain landforms associated with this stage. The moment rivers brings their sediments from hills to the plain areas, it produces alluvial fans and alluvial cones. When number of alluvial fans and alluvial cones they get coalescence, then it makes the Piedmont plains. Water divide are also continuously narrowed. Meanders and loops we can find in the river channel. We find a very large and widespread flood plains, and in this particular stage we also find oxbow lakes, which is which are the characteristic landform of the mature stage. Now coming to the old stage of Davisian cycle. Now what are the characteristics of the old stage of the Davisian cycle? As I have I have shown you the graph earlier. This graph, as you can see, the old age graph, where you can see the relief has started becoming lower and lower, and ultimately it goes to a completely plain before it creates certain monadnocks here and there. So this is the stage of the old age. Now coming to the characteristics of the old age, there is a total absence of valleys in season during the old stage. Neither vertical nor lateral erosion is taking place in this particular vertical erosion is completely absent, but the lateral erosion and valley widening is still active during this particular stage. The upper curve of the relief falls rapidly. Extremely low gradient, channel gradient we can find. The channel gradient becomes very low. There is almost, it becomes nil. It becomes and because of that there is very reduced or almost nil kinetic energy, and what we call is the maximum entropy is attained because it becomes a reliefless area. Now valley becomes flat with their concave valley side slopes, and we get extensive flood plains, well developed meanders, residual convexo-concave monadnocks as I have shown in the graph, and extensive undulating plains of extremely low relief. And ultimately what we found is peneplain and delta. So delta is a stage where a river lost its energy completely and it leaves its sediments. It is not even capable of transporting its sediments, so it leaves its sediments as it is at the mouth of a sea or a ocean, and that is what we call as delta. Peneplain is a plain which is formed in the old stage, which is a very reliefless plain where there is no relief features, and monadnocks are small hillocks which is lying here and there just in the old stage. So these are all the characteristics of the youth, mature and old stage. So by giving this organic concept of geomorphic cycle, Davis became very popular, and his contribution to the geomorphology became very, very important and very useful, because until date there was no systematic attempt to give the concept of geomorphic cycle by any scholar before William Morris Davis. And most interestingly, whatever concept that came after William Morris Davis, they were all largely dependent or referring to the William Morris Davis concept. So now, after discussing about the geomorphic cycle concept given by William Morris Davis, I will also try to critically evaluate some of the positive, some of the negative factors present in the Davisian concept of geomorphic cycle. But before that, let me quote S. Judson, a famous geomorphologist, who says, and it is very important to to listen to his quote, which says that grasp of time, space and change, his command of detail, and his ability to order his information and frame his arguments reminds us again and again that we are in the presence of a giant. So he was referring to William Morris Davis, and he was saying that William Morris Davis is a giant in the field of geomorphic cycle, and it's his grasp of time, space and change, his command of detail, and his ability to order his information and his frame of arguments reminds again and again that we are in the presence of a giant scholar. So that is what the stature of William Morris Davis in the field of geomorphology is there, and he is also worldwide known as well as the first systematic scholar to give the concept of geomorphic cycle. His concept was dominated from 1889, ever since he wrote his first piece on the cycle of erosion till 1950, and during the almost 1.5 century his concept of geomorphic cycle dominated the geomorphic discipline. Later on, after 1950, there were several new concepts, new new theory came up which refuted the ideas given by William Morris Davis, and it came up with certain new ideas. Now coming to what are the merits of the concept of geomorphic cycle given by William Morris Davis. One of the most interesting and one of the most positive factors of the William Morris Davis cycle of erosion is that it is highly simple and easily applicable to any situation. For instance, Bryan, another geomorphologist, has termed his cycle as he has made the cycle of geomorphic cycle in a very rhetorical style. His concept of geomorphic cycle is based on detailed empirical observations. So William Morris Davis was not an armchair geomorphologist, rather he visited the field, he observed the channels, he observed the streams, he observed the valleys, he observed the slopes, and then after he came up with a number of interesting research articles and also innovative research papers on the basis of which his geomorphic concept was known to the world. Many of the scholars have said that after Hutton's concept of uniformitarianism, the geomorphic cycle of erosion, or the concept of geomorphic cycle given by William Morris Davis, is the first true concept after uniformitarianism. So that is another important contribution of William Morris Davis in the field of geomorphology. William Morris Davis is also his concept of geomorphic cycle is also good because it is a synthesis of current geological thoughts. It is a synthesis of current geological thoughts during his time. So whatever geological thoughts that were being discussed, William Morris Davis has tried to compile all those geological thoughts into his theory based on certain his own empirical observations. But let me tell you that his empirical observations was observation only. It was not very rigorous measurement or chemical testing, or it was not very rigorously scientifically proven empirical practice. Rather it was just based on observations. It is this theory of geomorphic cycle given by William Morris Davis is also capable of both predictions and historical interpretation of landform evolution. So it can predict, and it also provides you the historical evolution of landform evolution. By prediction he means that if you want to predict what landform will be developed after a particular landform, you can easily predict it because it is a sequential and orderly development of the landforms, and therefore this particular geomorphic cycle theory given by William Morris Davis is also capable of predicting what landform will come next. Secondly, it also discusses about the historical interpretation of landform interpretations. So by historical interpretation of landform evolution, as I said, that William Morris Davis said that his geomorphic cycle is nothing but a period of time, a time span under which the landforms starts eroding and ultimately it becomes featureless plain. So the entire period is a geomorphic cycle wherein we can discuss it in through historical time, that during the youth period it was it was in having certain characteristics, in mature period it was having a different characteristics, and in the old period it was having a very different characteristics. Now after counting the merits of the concept, let us understand some of the demerits, or you can say some of the negative feedbacks of the Davisian concept. While you are appraising the critical appraisal, then it also needs, or it also requires that you discuss something about the on the fallacies in the geomorphic cycle given by Davisian concept. So here are certain points which cites about the demerits of the geomorphic concept given by Davis. First concept, or the first point of criticism was the rapid rate of upliftment of short duration, which was not acceptable to many of the geomorphologists later on. He said that there is a very short and rapid rate of upliftment, but later on geologists and geomorphologists said that plate tectonics is not a very short or rapid rate of is not a short and rapid process, rather than it is a very slow and long process, and therefore the geomorphologists and geologists were not ready to buy the argument that the upliftment of the land mass is rapid and short. Secondly, Davis said that no erosion starts until or unless the upliftment of landform ceases to operate. So what happens, that according to Davis, erosion only starts when the upliftment of landforms is complete, whereas we all know that it is not true. Erosion will not wait for the upliftment of landmass, rather erosion takes place immediately a landform is a landmass is uplifted, and rather it is a continuous process that is taking place, and therefore many of the geomorphologists were also not agreeing to the fact that erosion starts only after the upliftment of the landmass is complete. Thirdly, Davisian model requires a long period of crustal stability. Now we know that once the geomorphic cycle passes through youth, mature and old stage, it requires a crustal stability, then only it will be able to complete the geomorphic cycle. If something happens during the process, then the geomorphic cycle will not be able to complete the process, and therefore several of the scientists, several of the geologists and geomorphologists criticize this, that this is only a normative circumstance where a geomorphic, just to complete the geomorphic cycle, the entire geomorphic processes will wait, which is not true. It will not be waiting for the geomorphic cycle to complete, rather there are several other factors which keeps on interrupting the geomorphic cycle during the youth, mature and old stage, and one of the most important interruption is done by rejuvenation of the landforms. As we know that rejuvenation of the landforms means once the geomorphic cycle is taking place and it has started from youth, mature and old stage, in between at some point of time during this cycle period or cycle stage, what happens, all of a sudden certain tectonic process takes place, and all of a sudden a landmass erupts, uplifts in between, and therefore the entire cycle process gets disrupted, and therefore a new geomorphic cycle starts operating on the newly formed landmass. This process is called as rejuvenation, and this rejuvenation process is one of the most important factors in interrupting the geomorphic cycle given by William Morris Davis. Walther Penck, another geomorphologist, has criticized the Davisian model of the Davisian concept of geomorphic cycle on its overemphasis on time. As I said, that Davis was saying that the geomorphic cycle is a period of time under which a landmass goes from high relief to a low relief. So Walther Penck said that there is no time frame, it should not be made time bound, rather it is an open, it is an independent process, it is time independent process, and Walther Penck himself came up with his own time independent concept of geomorphic cycle, which we will discuss later. But Walther Penck was one of the most important German geomorphologist who has criticized William Morris Davis, and Walther Penck, though he could not live for a longer time, he died at an early age, but he wrote number of papers and his theory on geomorphic cycle, and those were all in a very complex German language, which later on were studied and translated in English, and there after that Walther Penck concept of geomorphic cycle was known to the world. So he was also one of the, he also has criticized the Davisian model of geomorphic cycle. Before I begin, the other concept of geomorphic cycle given by several other scholars, Walther Penck and GK Gilbert, L.C. King and others. Let me take if certain questions are there.
Please continue.
Achha. So friends, up till now what we have tried to discuss, we have tried to understand that geomorphic cycle is a process, is a time span under which a landmass goes from high relief to low relief. We have tried to also understand how the concept of geomorphic cycle have started, and among that today we have tried to understand the famous concept of geomorphic cycle given by William Morris Davis, under which I have tried to explain the organic concept of geomorphic cycle given by William Morris Davis, and wherein he tried to simulate the geomorphic cycle with that of a human being, whereas he said that as human being passes through his youth, mature and old stage, similarly a geomorphic cycle also passes from youth, mature and old stage, and the vigorness of the youthness the vigorness in maturity and the vigorness in old stage is also as equivalent as there in the geomorphic cycle. So this was the concept given by William Morris Davis.
Okay.
Later on,
sorry to interrupt you, sir. We have a call from Jharkhand. Good afternoon, friend. Please ask your question.
हाँ सर, ये जो जानकारी आप दे रहे हैं जियोमॉर्फिक साइकिल के बारे में, ये मतलब क्या है, मतलब थोड़ा सा इसके बारे में डिटेल थोड़ा बताइएगा।
ये ज्योग्राफी का एक जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी चैप्टर है, उस पर हम लोग चर्चा कर रहे हैं जो जियोमॉर्फिक साइकिल के बारे में, और जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी का जो डिफरेंट कॉन्सेप्ट है 10 कॉन्सेप्ट, उसको ऑलरेडी हम लोग चर्चा कर चुके हैं, और अगर उसको देखना है तो आप यूट्यूब पर या CEC की वेबसाइट पर लेक्चर उपलब्ध है, आप उसे देख सकते हैं।
ये जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी एक डिसिप्लिन है ज्योग्राफी का, और जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी के अंदर में एक कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ जियोमॉर्फिक साइकिल है, जिसमें हम लोग एक पूरे जियोमॉर्फोलॉजिकल प्रोसेस का एक साइकिल के रूप में उसका जो अध्ययन किया गया है, उसके ऊपर जो कॉन्सेप्ट दिया गया है डिफरेंट थियरीज से, उसके बारे में हम लोग चर्चा कर रहे थे।
ओके, नाउ कंटिन्यू सर।
तो this was what we have discussed, and we have also tried to discuss about the merits and demerits of William Morris Davis concept of geomorphic cycle, wherein we have said that his concept was very simple, and he has tried to explain the very complex process in a very simplistic manner, which goes to his credit, but at the same time there were certain premises which Davis on which Davis based his geomorphic cycle, was later on questioned a lot, later on criticized a lot, and among those were the concept of One was that there is a very short and rapid rate of upliftment, which was later on refuted, because as we know that the plate tectonics process is very slow and is not slow, and it is a very long process, and therefore to say that it is a very short and rapid period, it is wrong. And also because since Davis said that erosion process starts only after the upliftment of the land mass, is also false, because we know that the erosion process doesn't wait for the land mass to uplift, rather it works continuously on it, and therefore his concept was also criticized on this particular point. I also discussed about the crustal stability of the landforms, wherein I said that the Davisian concept was based on the premise that during the entire geomorphic cycle period, a crustal stability is needed, which was not true. We know that the crustal stability is for a longer duration of time is not possible, and therefore what we have discussed about the process of rejuvenation, which leads to the disruption or the interruption of the geomorphic cycle during its different stages, and again another geomorphic cycle begins on the way without even completing the first cycle. So these are all the merits and demerits of the geomorphic cycle concept that we have discussed. Now coming to the next concept, which I think I will not be able to complete today, but still I will continue this in the next lecture. This particular concept of geomorphic cycle was given by Walther Penck. To begin with, let me tell you something about the Walther Penck. Walther Penck was a German geomorphologist. Very little was known about him, but later on when his writings were translated into English language, then the scholars came to know about his theory, about his writings on the geomorphological cycle. Walther Penck is assumed to be one of the greatest scholars after Davis, but unfortunately Walther Penck couldn't live his whole life to develop his model of morphological system further. But whatever he wrote during his young age was a great, or you can say a revolutionary concept given by him, because he was the first person at that point of time who was found to be criticizing the famous and accepted theory of William Morris Davis at that point of time. Now, the main goal of the Walther Penck's model of morphological system was to find out the mode of development, cause of crustal movement, and this was to be done on the basis of exogenetic process and morphological characteristics. So this is the main goal of the Penck's model of geomorphological system. Now, since he has written his all of his concepts in German language, there are certain German terminology that also comes into light in the analysis of geomorphic cycle. His reference system was that the characteristics of landform of a given region are related to the tectonic activity of that region. So whenever he was trying to discuss about the morphological system, he was trying to refer to the tectonic activity of that particular region, and he said that by looking at the tectonic activity, that is which is the characteristics of a particular region, we can also understand the morphological system of that particular region. According to him, landform reflect the ratio between the intensity of the endogenetic processes and the magnitude of displacement of material by exogenetic process. So he also believed that the endogenetic processes and exogenetic processes operate simultaneously, and landforms is the outcome of the ratio between the two processes. So if a landform is formed, it has formed because the intensity of the endogenetic process and the magnitude of displacement of materials by exogenetic processes both operate simultaneously, or the ratio between the two leads to the landform formation. He also based his theory on number of premises. The first premises was that the morphological characteristics of any region is the result of competition between endogenetic and exogenetic processes. So as I said that there is always a competition between the endogenetic and exogenetic processes, and any morphological system which we see is the result of the competition between the two processes, that is endogenetic and exogenetic processes. Landscape development according to him was time independent. It is not time restricted. You cannot restrict the landscape development in a particular time period. So this was the major criticism of William Morris Davis made by him, wherein Davis emphasized on the time, whereas this Penck tried to give his time independent theory. Tectonic movement and their crustal factors can be explained on the basis of morphological characteristics. As I said that by looking at the tectonic movement and their causal factors, one can also analyze the morphological characteristics of a particular region. Now according to him, the shape of hill slope depends on the relative rates of valley incision and removal of debris by a river. So he has also given his concept of the hill slope, wherein he says that a shape of the hill slope is largely dependent on the rates of valley incision, how a river cuts its valley and how the depositional materials are transported along. So a particular kind of valley is formed because of these two processes. One is valley deepening or the valley incision, and another is removal of debris, removal of materials, removal of sediments by the river. He said that there are three stages of crustal movements. According to Walther Penck, he said that there are three different stages of crustal movements. One is crustal stability, second is initial domes uplift in a limited area, and third is stage of extensive crustal uplift. Now here we can compare it with the Davisian model, where Davis said that there is a very short and rapid upliftment of the land mass, and after that erosion process starts, wherein Walther Penck has completely gone the other way around, and he said that is not a short and rapid process, rather the crustal movements are of three different parts. One is, and the first stage is where there is a complete crustal stability. Second particular stage is where the initial domes uplift in a limited area, the smaller upliftment of the land mass takes place, and finally there is an extensive crustal uplift. So it is a slow process of land mass upliftment. First it is almost stability, second is smaller domes upliftment, and thirdly rapid and extensive crustal upliftment. These three stages of adjustment between crustal movement and valley deepening, I think I will stop here, because I will discuss the detail of the Walther Penck in my next lecture, because it's a long lecture, and I will also try to discuss about the geomorphic concept of geomorphic cycle given by certain other scholars. So I have just started and I have just given you a brief introduction about what was Walther Penck's idea on the geomorphic cycle. I have also briefly discussed about his premises and how his ideas was different from that given by Davis. So I will continue this lecture in my tomorrow's class. So do watch us on tomorrow at 2 p.m. to listen more.
Okay,
Thank you
so
very
well
much.
friends, with this word I thank Dr. Abhay Kumar for giving such a wonderful lecture, and I also thank all of you for watching the lecture. Thank you very much.